Welcome to CISO's Insiders podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Welcome, everybody. Today I'm speaking with David Monnier. David, looking at your brief bio that I have here, I see that you start off as a Marine, as an officer, as a non-commissioned officer in the Marine Corps. I see you transition into various security roles in the Indiana University, and after that you held a bunch of other security-related positions, and then coming up on quite a long stint at a company called Team Cymru. Not sure how I pronounce that, but if you want to.
Yeah, thanks,
yeah,
Ben. Thanks
step in.
You're one of millions who have a hard time with that name, by the way. So we used to be the number one entry on our frequently asked questions part of our website. But yeah, Ben, I'm a fellow at Team Cymru presently. I also work as our chief evangelist, and then I run a number of various teams inside network and security infrastructure in our intelligence practice. I oversee those teams. But I started my career, like you said, I was in the U.S. Marine Corps. I had a non-technical job. There's not many technical jobs in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps mostly just blows things up, so that was, my specialty. But when I got out of the Marine Corps, I had the chance to work in electronic printing. And then from there, went to university and to work at the university, high performance computing, had a major security incident that kind of highlighted that I had some natural talents to understand the security components of what we were doing. And then I went on to, from there, I went from Indiana University to work as part of the Internet 2's efforts to participate in the Research and Education Networking ISAC, which is one of the infrastructure ISACs here in the United States. And from there, I met Rabbi Rob Thomas, who invited me to join Team Cymru 15 years ago now, which is kind of crazy to think how much time has passed, because it seems like just yesterday. But yeah, that's how I got here.
Okay, thank you. And today, it's going to be a bit of a special edition of our podcast. We're not you don't fall into the specific category of a chief information security officer. So we're going to have a discussion that would be somewhat different today. We'll be talking about the evolving space of ASM. Before we dive in, I always like to ask a couple of icebreaker questions here. Can you share your marital status and favorite drink?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm married. Have a daughter. And my favorite drink, probably a rum old fashioned. If I were gonna have one. I used to be a beer guy, but I'm doing my best to not soak up all those calories. But prior to that, I would have said a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale would probably have been my go-to.
From a calorie count perspective, I'm not sure rum is leaner than a beer. It's all sugar, right?
Yeah, it's sugar, but I drink way less of it. Because the ABV is so much higher, so it's like less stuffing and more turkey. So
that's true. Okay.
So ASM is a term created by Gartner, I believe, but it stands for Attack Surface Management. And specifically, what it is the general term for applying a few different technologies together towards the same outcome of, well, as the name suggests, looking at your external attack surface. It includes things like asset management. It includes things, so think like discovery, things like that, knowing what you have on the network and knowing where it's at. And then as a result, it very nicely eases into the ability to then do vulnerability scanning, patch management, those types of follow-on things that come from knowing that you have an asset. Now, as you said, we don't really fit into the kind of typical security I guess envelope or bucket, whatever you want to describe it as, and that's not lost on us. So we are really our niche has been being an intelligence provider, specifically threat intelligence. So we're going on our 16th year as a business. 17th year, something like that. And we really got our start helping to provide, let's call it situational awareness, theater information, if you will, theater in the sense of like a combat theater. But as far as understanding adversaries, how they were misusing the internet, what their tools and tactics and methods were, and then how people's products could be improved and made better. Using our intelligence. So originally, we didn't set out to try to make any kind of specific product because we felt we were best at being an intelligence provider. So we kind of took, I don't know if you remember years ago, there was the company BASF used to have this really large advertising campaign that was in print and in television media that was, we don't make, and then they would list it an item. They would say like, we don't make skis, we make skis faster. We don't make CPUs, we make CPUs smarter, this type of thing. And they were known as like a company, and they still are for this matter, but they were really known as a company who improved other people's things. And we set out to kind of do that same thing. That was our intention. But as we got along the path, we started to realize that we felt that we had an offering that could fill a need and a niche that nobody else was really looking at. So that's kind of why we don't fit quite in the normal vein, because to be honest, we're actually an intelligence company and less of a security company.
Like in your opinion, and let's try, we're trying to keep this as vendor neutral as possible, obviously, but what's the difference then, or how is it different in your opinion from the vulnerability management space and tools and all the solutions that we have out there?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand kind of the evolution of the problem that ASM set out to solve. And from that, I think then it makes more sense, kind of like as a holistic view. All right, asset management and vulnerability management, and vulnerability management in the sense of both scanners and then also, patch management systems. Those have been around, and while not typically put together in the same product, those are concepts that have been around for a long time. And I think one of the things that the original ASM solutions that came to the market, one of the things that they really helped accomplish was, like, if you know your address space, then this is meaning IP address space, then this is a collection of tools that can help you, to understand what devices are at those IPs. And then once you know that, then okay, we can scan them. And then once we know what we've scanned them, now we know, what they might be running, what services they might be running. And from there, we know like what they might need to be patched and things like that, right? And this is a very labor-intensive exercise for a couple of reasons. For starters, it's labor-intensive in the sense that you, the owner, so the asset manager, let's say, you have to know all of your IP space not just the IP space assigned to you. So, and what I mean here, let's use, for example, a company that needs to scale quickly might set up infrastructure in like Amazon AWS to use temporarily as a service, right? Well, in traditional ASM concepts, where the tool and oftentimes the licensing operates this way, which is the reason for it, but where the tool is like, you can scan this specific CIDR mask, maybe a /24, but if AWS's address space is outside of that space, you're not going to be scanning these other parts of your infrastructure, because whether we like it or not, when you expand your service into a cloud, that cloud is now part of your edge. That cloud is part of your attack surface. This is your infrastructure. Granted, you're leasing access to it, but that doesn't make it any less yours, or in the responsibility kind of sense, right? So when you look at kind of, first we had these separate tools. Then someone realized, hey, we should put these tools together so that you can kind of look at one place, look at one thing to scan our address space every day, see if there's new devices, and then if there are, scan them, and so on. That was kind of the state of attack surface management as we saw it when we approached the marketplace. And like I said, initially, we were really hoping that we could just be a supplier of intelligence into the space. But when we discovered that really nobody's tools were, let's call it, I don't want to call it self-aware, but let's say machine learning capable, meaning they were kind of fire and forget, in the sense that you gave it an address space and that's all that it would scan, right? When we realized that that was the case, and we know, because we are, we're tracking adversaries every day on the internet, we're watching bad actors exploit things all over. We know how dynamic of a situation security is every day. I mean, attackers stand up and tear down infrastructure, new methods routinely, just as we do the same thing. So we realize that unless your tool is taking advantage of dynamic inputs as well, that you stood a poor chance of actually truly covering your assets. And to give you an example, so like asset discovery, if you're only looking for IPs in your IP space, and I know I keep going back to this, but it's really important for people to understand that if your ASM tool is really relying on you to tell it of what to look at, it's really kind of failing you out of the gate. But if you go through and you know that this address space is already yours, the only thing you don't know is what's plugged in there. You don't actually know the actual shadowed IT, the thing that is the real bane of security operations, is the device you don't even know about. And a device you don't know about is likely not in your address space, and that's why you don't know about it to begin with. Like I said, if we were to sit down and look at how many cloud providers there were, I bet there's 50 easily. Right now, if we were to just put them all in a bowl, but there's probably, say, 5 major ones that are like household name size. AWS, Google, Azure, and so on. These guys are really, really big. And imagine if you had to license your tool to scan all of that space to look for your assets. It's just not realistic with the way that kind of the traditional tools worked. So what we looked to do was sit down and take kind of the traditional tool model and say, not just, obviously it will also look for the domain, either be it namespace or IP space that you tell it to look for. But we also use our globally collected insights to identify other things on the internet that are very likely related to you or critical to you. And what we mean by that is, so for example, occurrences of your namespace appearing in certificates that came from somewhere else on the network, right? On the internet, not the network. But so if your domain appears in an SSL certificate, outside of your address space, that's something you should know about, either because it's somebody pretending to be you, or because it's some asset that you didn't realize, your organization was using, or had been using. And so that kind of discovery tool started to make us think about the application of intelligence to the ASM procedure. Again, we're positioned remarkably well to be able to even make that comparison, just given all the other insight that we collect. But when we sat down and looked at, aside from discovery, what other things could intelligence come to the table? What else could we apply to in the ASM model? The other things that we realized were, for example, knowing whether or not a device is already compromised will change considerably what it is you should do if you discover that it's vulnerable to something. So it's not uncommon at all, right? Say in the shadow IT example, where you didn't know there was some asset that was running on your network. If you didn't know about it, you probably didn't know to patch it. And if you didn't know to patch it, it probably sat vulnerable for some amount of time. And wouldn't it be great to know if your tool could already tell you, like, hey, we've discovered this asset. It looks to be related to you. It's not even on your network. It's some instance, some web server running in AWS, but appears to have your domain on it, and it's not been patched in 8 months. And we've seen it talking to, these known command and control servers every, 25, 30 minutes for the last 6 months. It's probably beaconing because it's already infected. And to know that type of information about it changes now. You're no longer looking to mitigate something. You now have to remediate something. And that's a totally different exercise, and sometimes involves different teams. So it allows you to better apply the resources that you have. So what we saw was that both threat intelligence, in the sense of, are these things compromised, but also intelligence as in asset discovery, looking for and labeling, identifying, what's going on the internet and seeing which of these things might be related to you. Those were both immediate and obvious value adds to that process, we thought. So then once we realized that kind of this external in intelligence application was missing, we started to wonder, well, what other types of intelligence, and in this case, we're talking more of the business intelligence approach, right? Is identifying which of your assets are most critical to your operation, as opposed to just happen to have IP addresses, right? So in the traditional ASM model, so you go and scan a bunch of services, and maybe you identify 2 Active Directory servers on your network, right? Which one is your primary AD and which one is your secondary, or which ones you don't even know is running? You can't tell that just by scanning the service, right? You have to be able to know that. And what we realized was that a lot of the existing offerings didn't allow you to add that kind of internal intelligence, which is kind of that business intelligence. Which systems are most important to us? How should we be seeing the internet? What's our normal routing look like? Who's our ISP? What's their reputation? All of these other factors, we realized that a real tool that was really going to be able to handle these things needed not just outside input, as in this is what we've discovered, but for the administrators to say, okay, these 10 assets are the most critical components of our infrastructure. And if something happens to them, we need to address this immediately. And none of the other tools really allowed that to happen. They really, they tend to do one of two things. They either order everything based on a CVE score. They say this is a CVE of X or N, but this other one is N+1. So this, I'm going to show you this as if it's more important. Or they use the, MITRE ATT&CK approach, which is, what could be done with this? Is it a remote code execution? Is it whatever. But again, at the end of the day, neither of those involve your input. So, two infectable devices on your network, I hate to say it, but they're not created equally, right? If one of those devices is absolutely critical to your business operation and the other one is not, well, the one that's not, you can just turn off and now your problem is solved. But if the other one is absolutely critical to your operation, maybe you may not even be able to turn it off to do the patch. You may have to stand up a second instance of it that's patched so that you can do like a hot swap using high availability methods or things like that. But how would you know to do that if you don't have the ability to label that, right? So that was the other effort that we really looked to do, was add business intelligence, so kind of the smarts of what's important to our day-to-day operations, and add that to our attack surface monitoring solution.
Okay, got it. Now, we're talking about an ever-evolving and ever-growing landscape of threats, right? So, and I know you mentioned, the way specifically you go about in identifying what we call shadow IT and all kinds of other assets that are outside the purview of your specific LAN or domain. Can you think of any real-life examples of or cases where the lack of ASM or poorly managed ASM or maybe not full suite ASM, it actually wasn't able to prevent a specific breach or incident, like something that you're aware of?
Yeah, lots and lots of the data exposures that we've seen over the last 5 years have been attributed back to that. Gartner, back in 2017 or so, I believe it was 17, they said they predicted that something like 40% of incidents in the following year would involve, shadow IT. Which makes absolute sense. I mean, if no one's updating a system, it will eventually get popped. There's just no other way around it. Even if it's not on the internet, someone will eventually plug it into something that gets it owned. So all of the data breach examples that go back, like the U.S. Post Office, the Republican National Committee, lots of municipalities, quite a few different medical teams, insurance companies. They have these, and they're simple instances, right, where they have, say, S3 bucket that just, they have some developer spins up for, maybe they need it for a week, right? And 6 months later, it's still running, still with your customer data on it. And no one from the security team ever scanned it to see if it was doing authenticated access. And there have been, like I said, there have been loads of them. The largest voter leak came back to being the examples not the example, but the excuse that was given was that, well, we didn't know, we didn't know to know. We didn't know it was out there, so sorry. And that's the example that they give. Airport data recently has been in the news as well. There was, again, 1.5 million files, terabytes of airline data, to include passenger manifests and to know who went where and when and what packages and what cargo was on the aircraft. I mean, all kinds of stuff. But this is a major, airports are a regulated industry, right? So even with regulation, just because the rules said they had to be monitoring their infrastructure for changes, which I'm sure they were, because their infrastructure was what they thought was theirs, didn't include external cloud services, because they didn't, because probably when they wrote the regulations or when they bought the tools, they didn't take those into account. Now, are any of them specifically because ASM fell short? I mean, that's, it's hard to say. It's hard to give examples of a negative, it's of the absence of something, and the reason for that absence can be tricky to kind of, pin down. But I can say for sure that modern ASM would alleviate these potentials for these kind of things to happen. And when I say modern, I'm really talking about self-learning, ASM solutions that go out and look for new insights on their own. Those type of automations, if implemented correctly or if informed well enough with good intelligence, they would see these instances where, like, hey, you have this S3 bucket that's in your space that we know is your space because your web services are here as well, that type of stuff.
And then let's talk about how does one go about in operationalize whatever you're able to reflect from the ASM? Because, I can imagine there's going to be a ton of information, so many events and so many insights. How do you go about actually, getting true value out of deploying such a tool?
Yeah, so I would say, everybody's workflow is going to be unique for the most part, right? Everybody prefers a certain process kind of based on how they think or how they solve problems. But one of the big advantages of kind of the modern world is API integrations, right? All kinds of people have exposed API inputs from their tools. And so our approach is to be able to hook directly from the tool, from the ASM solution, be able to hook out and affect policy on the infrastructure, whether that policy be access policy or whether that policy be authorization policy in the sense of get this thing off the network altogether, or whether it be pushing out, teeing it up to be added to the patch management process, or like I said, in some cases, reach out to the switch port and turn the switch port off until we identify what that asset is. So the big key here, though, to automation is identifying what controls you have to be able to enforce things on the network, and then just conducting integrations, with the ASM solution. Now, in our case, we tried to make it as single honed as possible. So we're kind of putting everything into one, meaning the vulnerability scanner, the asset discovery, the threat intelligence component of it, and the business intelligence tunables. We've put all into one. But so all that leaves for you ideally is, your routers, your switches, your firewall, as far as, what to do about that. And then if you happen to use some type of patch management mechanism, some type of hook to that to say, hey, we've discovered this new thing, make sure this is added, when we do updates every night, or make sure AV is getting updated on it, or these types of other policy components. But really it just comes down to API integrations.
Okay. And, in your opinion, why do you think every modern organization nowadays actually need an ASM tool? What's wrong with the approach that many organizations still use of just having, a separate, like a SIM solution and, possibly a vulnerability management solution? In your opinion, what are the merits? Why should, this market continue to evolve?
Yeah, I think, I have colleagues who are at really large organizations, large enterprises, where they still manage their assets in Excel and things like that. Like they're still, even doing that the old way. And that kind of cascades throughout their process. But I think it goes back to this, like if you don't have something that's learning about the changes that are happening in your infrastructure, and infrastructure, again, is leased or owned. It doesn't matter, whether it's in your data center or somebody else's. If your operations are relying on it, that's your infrastructure. That's yours now. And if you don't have a tool that's keeping up with those things, and again, let's start with the problem from the very beginning, just asset discovery. If you don't have something that's discovering your new things as they're spun up, then you're not going to be able to know to vulnerability scan them. You're not going to know to patch them. You're putting a lot of hope in the systems, just being maintained. Now, in the case of the big cloud providers, they're aware of that, right? So they realize that there's a lot of let's call it orphaned instances, right? They know that this is the case, and while it's good for their business model, it can start to damage their reputation over time, where they're like, hey, people come here because it's easy, but then they don't know how to maintain the stuff. And they were aware of that. And Google and Amazon both, for sure. I would imagine Azure does similar things, but they have started to maintain their own distro for the operating systems, where they're doing these patches in the background, so you don't have to do the patching. But that's if you think about it, that's a crazy reliance. Now you're relying on your cloud provider to be responsible for your security as well. If you're in a regulated industry, does that constitute a third party accessing those systems? That gets very tricky. But even if you have a cloud provider that's trying to help you with this stuff, it's still no comparison to knowing and doing it yourself. And that I think is what it comes back to, is having that context and the assurance of what your things are doing, what you're reliant on, what the most critical systems to your operation, what state they're in, where they're at, if they're managed or not, and kind of owning your own future, or at least having a bigger say in it.
Okay, let's say I'm a CISO, okay, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just starting to think about this. What do I need to know about the ASM market, in your opinion?
That first and foremost, you have to know that it's in evolving state right now. So it went not dissimilar to, say, web. People talk about Web 1 and Web 2, and now we're coming, to Web 3 technologies are coming and whatnot. In a similar fashion, ASM has evolved considerably since its inception. So the first thing that you need to understand is you need to say, is this a static approach or a dynamic approach to doing ASM? If it's a static approach, and a static again means, do you have to tell it what address space to look at? Do you have to give it the domain? If you have to provide all of the insights, then you probably have the approach that you're going to be using is going to be antiquated already. So machine learning needs to be part of it. In our case, we went so far as to also add human analysts to try to look for the things that machine learning doesn't quite catch. So we have analysts assist people, on the setup part as well. So the other thing that you should ask yourself is, if you're looking at your solution, is if someone says, oh, well, we do have this automated solution, your first question should be, okay, but how much do I have to teach this solution of what to do, or how much will you help me teach it what to do? And so this is, your implementation engineer, your solution engineer, these types of folks. You should ask, like, well, are they familiar with identifying assets, or are they just someone who knows how to use this tool? Because those are two different outcomes as well. One is, someone who could give you a demo. The other is someone who could actually help you protect your infrastructure with the tool. So, and those are, two different things. And then the next thing I would ask is, is it something that can talk to all of our other assets that we already have? Meaning, can it talk to our SIM? Can it talk to our routers? Can it talk to our firewalls? And so on. Can it talk to our VPN? Can it turn on and off users if need be? That type of stuff. Or is it the case where those tools have to talk to the tool? Meaning, directionality of the API. Make sure that the solution you're looking at is modular. Make sure it's not just something that sends out an email telling people what to do, because there are things that you'll see. There are products in the market where they consider that to be an automation, whereas they took what you're reading on the interface and just sends it, and now you read it on the interface of your mail client. That's not automation. Just getting the report sent to you, that's not automation. So you need to make sure that you have real automation happening, and that you have real interaction between when you discover something in the ASM product, that you can actually affect policy somewhere out there to make a change that actually matters, as opposed to, like I said, sending yourself just an email alert or something like that.
Thank you. Now, coming to the tail end of this episode, I wanted to see if we can sum it up with a couple of last questions here. So, before selecting an ASM vendor, do you have like quick tips, maybe like a couple questions, up to 5 questions that I need to ask myself as a potential buyer when I'm trying to engage with an ASM vendor?
Yes. So, like I said, is automation there? If so, how and in what ways? What inputs does it have? So, like, there are learning capabilities out there that require you, for example, to feed it with your own DNS data. And they do new asset discovery because if they see users on your network start looking up a new DNS name, some DNS record that is in your domain, it automatically says, oh, hey, we've learned of this new asset and moved out. So find out what type of learning is it doing. Do you have to provide the library, if you will, or does it have access to a globally collected, already collected data lake? And that's, again, one of what we consider to be one of our huge differentiators is all of the access that we have already allows us to not rely on the person at all. Actually, you could almost use our ASM solution as like a third-party audit even, because you really don't need to know much about what it is that you want to, what attack surface you want to monitor. So I would ask those 2 questions, or 3 questions, I should say, first. And then you should ask yourself, okay, once it looks at things, how can I bend its answer to what is reality? Because again, many of these tools are going to tell you something is critical based on not your input. They're going to say, well, MITRE said the CVE on this or whatever is of this certain value, so you need to take it seriously. But that's crazy. I mean, there's no one out there that runs their business based on the priorities of some third person who comes in and says, oh, I want you to worry about this other thing. That's not how business works. Business is, what you're trying to do. You find your customers who they know what they want you to do. And those are really the 2 main inputs for your business. Right? So if your ASM product doesn't allow you to say, okay, yeah, I know this problem is there, but this isn't the big problems because these other things are more critical to me. And if it doesn't show you those prioritized tasks based with your inputs, you might also, want to go look again. So those are the big things I would say. So auto learning, assistance in setting it up, integrations to outside access, and a lot of available data, for your tool to learn from that you don't have to provide.
Thank you for that summary. And final question before we wrap this up: what, in your opinion, what's in store when we look to the future of ASM?
So hopefully mass adoption, the kind of the first approach at ASM, I think the fact because it was so static in how it functions, lots and lots of people, we conducted a survey of like 400 and something practitioners who had used ASM, and lots of folks out there were dropping their ASM solutions because they were either too expensive for what they got back or too hard to operate and things like that. Hopefully, those are largely the results of kind of the ineffectiveness of the static approach. So hopefully once the market and the community starts to realize that there are now kind of, more self-aware and more learning and dynamic tools out there, that, the future starts to look brighter and people start to adopt those. Now, I can't say beyond that prediction-wise. I do expect that unless you were collecting insights globally on the data lake sharing side, I think it would be hard to try to get into the threat intelligence business right now. So if you're looking to pick a solution, I would probably look at someone who either produces their own intelligence or has, very strong intelligence partnerships to make their product better. Because I think the products that rely, even if they're doing the dynamic discovery stuff without enough data to go into that dynamic discovery, I don't know necessarily what you'd find, right? The internet's a big place. So you really need someone who has sensors and visibility, all over the place for that to really work effectively. So I predict that starts to matter at some point as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. And I think with that, the only thing that's left for me is to thank you for your time before I let you go back to your life. Thanks again for joining me today in this episode. That was a quick, session with the subject matter expert around ASM, Attack Surface Management, David Monnier. Any final notes?
Cymru.com, cymru.com for folks that want to learn more about us. You can find us on LinkedIn as well. And we have lots and lots of no-cost and community offerings. That's kind of how we started our business, was looking to provide community services at no cost for the folks that make the internet work. We wanted to make their lives easier. So if you're an operator out there, take a look at our website. We have lots and lots of free stuff to help make your job easier.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. And see you soon. See you next time. Thank you, David.
Ben.